Hi everyone, welcome. I have here in front of us a couple of European nightcrawler worm bins. And in these worm bins we've been composting a couple test objects. We put some t-shirts, 100% cotton t-shirts, although I think we've already determined that there's at least some very, very minute percentage of material that make up these t-shirts that's not cotton, because that material has not been breaking down. The stitching along the edges of the sleeves and the collar are made up of some sort of a material that just hasn't been showing any signs of breakdown. So even though the shirts are labeled as 100% cotton, I think that's more of a technicality if you think about it that way, in terms of some of the stitching material that puts the shirts together is not cotton. And that's really the only stuff that seems to be remaining at this point. I mean, when we came in here 9 days ago last time to feed them, we did encounter what remained of the t-shirts. And it certainly wasn't much, but here and there we did find some fragments of material that was still about perhaps no bigger than the palm of my hand, which is pretty impressive. And most recently, I guess just based on the number of systems I've got running, I've not been able to get back into my systems in a period of time under than 10 days. So it's a little bit of an anomaly right now to be able to get back to this system after only 9 days since the last check-in. The main reason for that is because I'm anticipating not being able to get down here for a little while to tend to my bin, so I've been trying to get a leg up on getting all my systems fed in such a way that I can go for almost a week without needing to come down here to tend to them. So for that reason, we're back in here only 9 days after checking in with them last time. And the time that the t-shirts have been in these bins now, normally I like to go for round numbers. So in most cases it would have probably been on day 100 of the t-shirts being placed in here that I would have come back in here to tend to the bins, but we're actually 2 days shy of that milestone point in time. These t-shirts that were in here were put in here 98 days ago, and I'm just trying to remember what kind of materials we had placed into these systems. I definitely remember potato peels, and I did expect to find the peels of some potatoes, although the worms will come by and nibble all the meaty bits off the potato. They'll usually leave the very skin of it for last, because that stuff seems to resist breakdown a little bit better than what's inside the potato. But this other stuff that I'm finding sort of piled on top, pretty thick, it's not coming back to me what it was that we might have placed in here. And usually I don't take a direct whiff of the smell of materials in my worm bins. I'll usually use the technique that you learned in chemistry class, which is to sort of just breeze a little bit of the scent coming off something in the direction of your nose, so you can try to catch a whiff of it without it ending up in your nostrils in full force. I'm not really recognizing what it is that we placed in here last time as food, besides the potatoes. I mean, it could very well be some of my worm chow, but it just seems so thick, you know. It seems like it was really piled in here thick, so I'll be curious to see what that was when I go back to my desk to edit the video and update my spreadsheet. At that point in time, I'll have a chance to take another glance at what the video last time showed and what it was that we had put in here for them. I mean, despite the fact that there are clearly leftovers here, perhaps not so much of the potato, but more of whatever it is that was put in here alongside of it, I'm going to be giving them some more food today. And that should tie these little guys over up until some point in the future, when I'll have another opportunity to come back to visit with them and give them some more food. So whatever it is that we gave them last time seems to be causing a nice turnout. We got a little worm ball hanging out here. Good jumble of worms huddling together to take part in whatever it is that we fed them last time. It's usually kind of unusual for me to come back into one of my worm bins and not recognize what I gave them last time, or be unable to be reminded of what it was just by checking it out. So it's definitely piqued my interest and my curiosity. So either way, let's get on to the matter at hand, which is the novelty item that was placed into these systems. Over here in bin number 1, it was a Microsoft t-shirt that we gave the worms to nibble on and to eat. At this point, it's probably more fair to say that they've eaten it rather than just to refer to what they've done as nibbling, because they've really gone to town on this stuff. Holy cow. More worms. Look at them all. I don't know. I don't want to keep torturing them by holding them in my hands in the bright lights. What I'd really like to try to do is just set the threads, which are clearly not cotton and won't be broken down, similar to the label, which is also not going to break down because it too is most likely not cotton. I'm just wondering if we're going to see any more of those last couple chunks that we observed of the t-shirts in these systems, because we did try to put everything back into the feeding zone sort of in a little mound so that it'll be easy enough to find it all later. But I mean, all these worms that we're seeing in here, it's pretty impressive just to see how many of them have come out for the food that we put there for them. And it does seem like they came out for not just the food, but perhaps they partook in nibbling away at our t-shirt. I'm sorry, I don't know why it's just making me question what it was that we might have put in here for these little guys. Whatever. I'm sure after I get back to my desk and I review the video from the last check-in and see what we gave them, I'll flash something on the screen if it doesn't come to mind. We've only excavated the feeding zone in bin number 1. We still need to do the same in bin number 2 and see how the t-shirt we put in there is coming along. I mean, not that it makes any difference, but the t-shirt that was put into bin number 2 was from Roxio, the Roxio company. Both shirts, Microsoft and Roxio, they were both kind of IT, information technology types of garments that I had received from work. Every time we would do a project, we would have little freebies that we would give the clients when we were doing projects in their areas, doing larger migrations. And the Microsoft t-shirts, I believe, were part of that. The Roxio t-shirts, I believe I picked up when I went to a Macworld Expo once, which they don't really do anymore, I don't believe. I think they put an end to that quite a while ago. So I'm starting to date myself, I believe, just by mentioning that I did attend a Macworld Expo in New York City at the Jacob Javits Convention Center. I did get to go a couple times, actually, while I was in that role at my IT job back in those days. So now here too, I'm definitely bumping into more of this stuff. I'm starting to wonder if it could have been bread. I have recently been trying to do away with some chunks of bread. Whoa, look at all that. Just a massive amount of worms. I mean, if there was still any of that cotton fabric remaining here, it just seems like it didn't stand a chance against this many European night crawlers coming out to feast on whatever we fed them, and then possibly just encounter the t-shirt and help break it down. Now, let's see what we could do about extracting what remains of the shirt that's over here in bin number 2, which is totally covered in worms. And I guess what I'm really just looking to see is if I can sort of spot perhaps another little remaining fraction of the material that during the last check-in we were still observing in here, but it was pretty heavily broken down already, and it was definitely put right into the middle of the pile of where we fed last time. And whatever it is that we gave them, it certainly resulted in a lot of worms coming out to feast on this stuff. And that in itself could have just pretty much done in whatever remained of these 2 cotton t-shirts. Definitely gonna have to go revisit the video from last time and try to figure out what it was that we fed last time, because it really definitely resulted in a fairly impressive turnout over here. But why don't we proceed with just giving them their share of foods today. What I brought down for them to serve as bedding, nothing too glamorous, just some soiled paper towels and napkins. So why don't we drop some of that in here for them. A little bit of this, a little bit of that, and then we can start piling in the foods that we've got for them. I'm still managing to preserve some of the tomatoes that came out of my garden, and I had a little collection of them that was starting to show signs of mold. So it was at that point I sort of made the call that it's no longer human food. At that point I pretty much allowed it to transform to its next functional purpose in life, which is to become worm food. And as you can see, some of that might be frost from the freezer, but some of it might very well be mold. And you know, I've been going into some of my systems where I've been feeding some of my tomatoes from my garden, and here and there I've been bumping into tomatoes that just haven't been touched by the worms because the skin of the tomato just never got breached. The little tomato just sits there in the bin, unaffected by the worm traffic passing it by, because none of the moist insides of it have been revealed to the worms yet. So I'm certain that some of these are already clearly breached because they're clearly torn and mushy and everything else, but some of these are quite possibly not breached yet. So when we come back in here next time, some of these might have resisted any sort of worm activity, possibly because their skins have not been burst yet, and that's fine. We're just going to let that be the case. But you know, we're going to throw in a little bit of this pulverized corn cob that I still got a little bit left of. It's gradually getting done away with as I feed it to my different systems, and it doesn't really seem to break down quite as quickly as I thought it would, but we've certainly got time to spare. They can just do it at their own pace, whatever works for them. Not in a particular hurry. At 140 some odd days old, these systems do still probably have a little bit of ways to go before we decide to start steering them towards completion and harvest. So I've got some other stuff like worm chow to include down here, and then the restoration of the leftovers that we plucked out of here. But I'm thinking we're going to be returning these because now that all the worms have cleared out, now we can actually get a glimpse at what remains here. We are clearly seeing some remnants of fabric still stuck to this piece of thread over here. And it is quite possible that some of those larger chunks that we encountered last time are also still down here somewhere. But just that, what I saw right there, is clear evidence of the fact that there's still a little bit of work to be done before we can really call this experiment done. So I'm at this point predicting that 2 days, the point in time when these t-shirts will have been in here for 100 days, it will not have been enough time for these t-shirts to get broken down. And we've most certainly been doing our best to try to help this process along by always putting the fabric right into the middle of where the worms are going to be traveling to come in pursuit of the foods that we keep giving them. So I don't think that we've been, you know, doing anything that could potentially hinder the breakdown process. Gosh, it's so weird. I can't remember what it was that we fed. And it must have been something a little bit unusual because usually I'm able to recognize the leftovers of the different stuff I drop into my worm bins, especially when it's something a little bit unusual. Something about the way it feels, it almost makes me wonder if it could have been bread, but I really don't feel confident enough to say for sure what it is. I will most likely be putting some sort of a little caption on the screen to say what it was that was fed last time. That's appearing to have drawn quite a crowd. So these old feeding zone indicators, we've clearly got replacements right there. Why don't we include these down in the feeding zones too? Because although this one right here seems to be holding up quite well, this one's already been pretty severely chewed on by the worms. So why don't we supplement the bedding with a little bit more paper just by dropping in those old feeding zone indicators, and then we'll try to, again, drive worm traffic in the direction of those objects by covering them with a little bit of worm chow. So let's proceed with backfilling the feeding zone. It looks like we've even got some leafy matter that even seems almost like it's not picked up any moisture. Well, it must have, because if it was completely dry, worms wouldn't be hanging out in this stuff. But you know what's kind of interesting, and I noticed it right away when I first started probing into the material here, and I didn't really make mention of it, was the fact that I think I'm sensing a little bit of warmth, you know? And I doubt that it would be the foods or the feedings that were placed in here warming up. I'm kind of leaning more towards the presumption that what I'm feeling is the warmth of the worms themselves, all huddling together, kind of generating some heat in the process of being mounded together the way they are. And it's kind of interesting as I reach my fingers down and I start to feel just a couple degrees warmer temperature than the surrounding material. It is kind of neat. And I'm not certain, maybe I'm wrong. Could partially be some of the foods that were placed in here are in the process of decomposition and microbial activity causing the warmth. Or it might be the worms, or maybe just a combination of both. It's hard to say. And it is a little bit muddy over here, I gotta say. Kind of makes me feel good that we're sort of blending it all together a little bit and mixing in some different types of materials with that stuff, because I don't know, when I encounter material that feels a little bit muddy, I always get a little bit worried that it's not going to permit sufficient airflow to remain saturated with enough oxygen to support healthy decomposition. As soon as you start getting that absence of oxygen, you get the kind of funky anaerobic bacteria start to thrive and create a little bit of a stinky environment, and we don't want to have that going on in our worm bins. So usually I try to attribute what I'm doing here, the probing through the material, as pretty much aeration, what you're seeing me do. Although when you see this many worms, you got to assume that just their traffic through the material in itself is got to be aiding in the aeration of the material to a certain degree. It does almost seem to me like no matter where we looked in this bin, whether it was right down the middle where the feedings had been, or all the way out on the very edges, furthest away from where the feedings had been, we're just seeing tons and tons of worms. Pretty significant populations. I think the populations, I even flashed them on the screen during the check-in last time. And there's only like a difference of 10 worms. Something like 1880 in bin 1 and 1870 in bin 2 or something like that. I think even last time I just said it wrong and I had to put the correction up on the screen with the actual numbers, but it was something like that, where there's only an estimated difference of about 10 worms between these two systems. And you got to remember that that goes back all the way to day one when we first launched these bins and we came up with our estimates of how many worms live in these systems. Since that time, the worms could have very well been very busy in here, procreating and increasing their numbers, and my guess would be that that's what we're seeing here, because somehow I get this feeling that we're probably dealing with systems that probably have populations that are in excess of those numbers. So I gotta say, that was quite a fun check-in. It always is when you're dealing with systems where you're observing lots and lots of worms, mobbing the stuff that you're giving them, clearly enjoying it. And looks like some of these little guys weren't really appreciative of my rough handling. Some of them are trying to crawl out of the bin. Hopefully they'll stay put. All right, everyone, that's it for our check-in. I got a few things I got to take care of getting cleaned up, put away. Not going to waste your time with that. Before I go really quick, let me just say thank you. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching. Bye now.